It's time to wake up and pray up here on the Finding Faith and Losing Sleep podcast, episode number 12. To believe or not to believe? That is the question. I think that is a good, I was trying to practice it. I can't do it as well, guys, as well as I did the, what? I can't do it as well, but to believe or not to believe? That is the question here on the Finding Faith and Losing Sleep podcast. Thank you so much for joining us here. Episode 12, like I said, you can go back. All the shows are kind of organic. We just are here talking about different things that make us lose our sleep while we're trying to find our faith or find our way through this life. It is just a podcast for real average people by real average people as well. One of those people is the producer of the show, the executive writer of the show, I guess. He doesn't write my script. He won't claim that at all because he doesn't want to take any any blame for anything I say. But it is Pierre at Pee-wee31 over on Twitter. Hello, Pierre.
What up, Wes? I'm glad you got the topic there, to believe or not to believe, because that is the question and that is the topic of our episode today. So just looking forward to diving in. You are correct. I do not write your script. Some things that come out, I have no idea where they come from, and I think it's good we leave it that way.
Well, we like to improvise a little bit on this. We have an outline. We practice the show just through the outline. I practice it in my head, and I'm just going to be honest with you. I have a lot of voices in my head. I'm sure everybody's got as many voices as I do. I don't have nearly as many voices though. Michelle is his wife, by the way, at GoPackGo411 over on Twitter. Michelle is his wife. I don't have as many voices as NF. Have you ever heard of NF, Michelle?
No.
Really? You have never heard of it, Pierre?
I don't think I know the NF you're referring to.
Why do you all get scared whenever I bring up something like that? No, listen, NF is a Eminem-ish type of rapper, but he's a Christian rapper. No swearing. He will absolutely dumbfound you with his abilities to do it. If you circle around to NF at all on your on your listening searches or whatever, he's got an album. I want to say it's called The Search. I'm telling you. We could do a reaction video to it. It's classic. But NF has just come out with a new song called Hope, and he's got a lot of voices in his head. It's a whole journey. All his albums are like a big journey, and it's interesting to see it because NF has a very similar background, I want to say, as I do, so I can relate to some of that. I think a lot of kids can relate to some of these things that NF talks about as well, and I think that even in society today, guys, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michelle, people have a tough time believing in anything in general anymore. I mean, sometimes we got the NFL being rigged, quote unquote, that gets trended on Twitter. Government's rigged, wrestling's rigged, sports are rigged, everything's rigged. It's hard to believe in anything nowadays.
Oh, I 100% agree. And it's true, especially like now that even pictures, like it used to be, well, there's a picture of it. Well, even that doesn't mean anything anymore because they can be photoshopped. Videos can be created. Voices can be like, phone numbers can be like spoofed and like all kinds of things. So it's a little scary and it makes you not have a foundation of like anything firm. So I was going to tell you though, I was thinking when you said, do I know NF? I'm like, I know KB, and like maybe we could create our own, but just like apparently just have to have two initials. Like we're good.
Christian rappers. This is our daughter's loving KB right now. So now you got NF, who we'll have to listen to, and KB, who we're familiar with.
Yeah. Well, NF's a little darker. I mean, I don't say it's darker. It's just different. It's KB's kind of fun, but NF, I'm telling you, it's real. He calls it real life stuff. But what do you think about that, Pierre, though, too? With everything out there in the world, whenever I think about how stuff can be fake and whether or not you want to believe or not to believe, it makes me want to go back to the simpler times of things that I know I can believe, things I know I can trust. And it's sad to say, but I almost don't want to trust anything or believe in anything anymore unless it's tangible, unless I could touch it. I want to return to the basics, Pierre.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the issue is that we live in such a fast-paced world with so much technology, which can be, used for good, but it can also be used for bad or for manipulation. And I think that's what's tough in today's world. As Michelle kind of alluded to, you got the Photoshop type things and just images that you can even, put into original type of images. You have questions with media and all types of stuff and what's taking place in the news. And sometimes too much information is a bad thing. I think that the world may have operated a little better and a little more on the honor system when we didn't have access to the things that we have access to really at our fingertips these days.
Mm-hmm.
No, I agree. And when I say I want to return back to some basic things, it's something that I've been trying to do as of late anyway. And really, it goes back to one of the commandments, if not both of the commandments that Jesus said were the greatest ones. It was the second one, really, as far as loving my neighbor as myself.
Mhm.
I know my neighbors next door. I know my neighbors on the road. I consider the people I work with my neighbors to some degree, the people in my town as my neighbors. And I've started trying to concentrate on those people a little bit more and giving positive energy into anything else that I do. Like on Twitter, for example, you can follow me at Lofinit. I've been trying to ask questions like, what advice would you give to somebody buying their first house? I own my house. I've had my mortgage forever. I'm 50 years old and I'm in that position in life where it's getting towards the tail end of paying off everything, kind of a thing. You know what I mean? So this advice isn't for me, but I think there's a lot of people out there that kind of, like you said, get caught up in the world, Pierre and Michelle, that just don't ever get to really sit down and think about things. So I'm trying to pour back into that community a little bit more, my neighborhood,
Yeah, well, what's interesting is, so when you think about what you're stating as a neighbor, when Jesus was asked, so who's my neighbor? He told the story, and it's a term that we now use even still to this day in our time, of the Good Samaritan. So it wasn't just like the neighbor wasn't just the person next door or down the block. His definition of neighbor to them was ultimately someone who was seen on the other side. So you think about, let's just say for a political standpoint, Republicans, Democrats. So a Republican was hurt, quote unquote, and a Good Samaritan was a Democrat. I think in this standpoint, Samaria, was obviously the ones that really had struggles with the Jewish people. And so when he said just about the neighbor itself, it was more the impact that your neighbor's really anyone, and it could be who you think's your worst enemy. That's also your neighbor. So I really just want to make sure we're thinking along that way. It's not just those that we converse with, in our neighborhood or next door. Sometimes it's those that we in our hearts think we may not like, or we won't like because of where they come from, etc. All of those people are your neighbors, and all of those people are those that you should love as yourself.
But I also want to say that what you're doing, Wes, is really beautiful.
Well, thank you. And I was thinking about how you and Pierre met, actually, Michelle, because that's what Pierre was describing that situation completely, because he was a neighbor of yours at work, and you said you really didn't like him, and he said, "No, you're gonna like me, girl." I mean, I don't know if he said that, but
you know what's so funny is when he was talking, that is exactly what I was thinking.
You won her over, Pierre.
I really did not, and I felt really bad for his girlfriend at the time, and I'm not even kidding. Like, hand to God, that is the truth. And it took God working on my behalf and on my heart, because I don't believe that he changed any. Honestly, I don't think he changed. I think the way I viewed him changed. And that is 100% God, and I couldn't be more thankful. So I had to go through some trials in my life, but I will say, Wes, when he was talking, that's what I was thinking. He's my neighbor.
Well, and you treated her like such, Pierre, and I'm, you were just being kind to her from that story and how it went. You were just trying to uplift her spirits and everything. And we could do that for so many people. Sometimes we don't want to ask those weird questions or ask those hard questions. Like, you could see somebody, if they're having a bad day, you can tell, and don't be afraid to say, "Hey, is there anything I could do for you?" I'm not scared. And look, don't put yourself in precarious situations. Like if somebody's car's broke down, it's a dark parking lot or something like that, and you're a young lady or even a young man now at these times, don't put yourself in a spot where you're going to end up maybe putting yourself in harm's danger, because there's a lot of people out there that don't love their neighbors or self, that they'd rather take advantage of their neighbors. But if you're in a position to be able to help somebody out, extend that courtesy, Pierre. And I remember that story with you and Michelle, and that's what you did.
I did. And sometimes it's hard to sit through it being told, because the good stuff's at the end. Up front, I'm painting this miserable person who was terrible to his ex. But no, it's just all about the heart. I think it's what it comes down to. And even in conversating, I know one thing that folks kind of feel is just I guess going through the motions is, how are you doing? Like when people ask that question, do you really want to know how someone's doing? Or are you just saying it as a pleasantry? And if you're not saying it as a pleasantry, then you have to be prepared for an actual answer, not just I'm fine, I'm okay, that most people expect someone to say. If they come out and they all of a sudden open up to you, hopefully you're in a position where you're ready to have that conversation, or if nothing else, just lend that shoulder or ear to someone who's hoping that you genuinely want to know how they're doing.
I think people too have a little tough time nowadays to believe or not to believe. Back to the subject title there, and believing in God, because that's the other part of the greatest commandments that Jesus talked about. And it was the first and foremost greatest commandment is to love the Lord God with all your heart, all your soul, all your might, all your strength. Huh? I got that one down pat, don't I? But to do that, and then that leads you into loving your neighbor as yourself. Okay, so that it all kind of revolves around together. But I think, Michelle, Pierre, and I'm not sure where this what direction this is going in necessarily, because we do try to keep this organic, but people have a tough time believing in God nowadays because he might not be as tangible as we think he is. But at the same time, maybe that's our eyes and our heart not being open to the possibility of there being a creator who has identified as Jesus's God and Jesus's Father and our God. So I think that people have a tough time believing that because they just can't touch it, Pierre.
Yeah, I think it's hard for when people can't see, touch, and feel, situations. I kind of point to like the dinosaurs. So dinosaurs exist. Everybody believes dinosaurs exist, but they believe it because of fossils and things along those lines. Whereas history that maybe didn't have the factual bones of things, or didn't have photos and images of what took place, it's kind of hard for people to comprehend. And we obviously point to the Bible for a lot of history. It's a history book in our eyes. But when you then throw in the part like we even discussed in our last episode, where you find some verses maybe are missing, or some verses that were found on manuscripts may not have been included, within the Bible, that then starts to bring out that doubt and questioning for believers and non-believers when it comes to, okay, well, why is this not there? Why was this taken out? Or why were certain things not included? It really starts to open up a can of worms when it comes to belief.
Well, yeah. And I think we're in a bit of a debate culture in general right now. So, everybody wants to debate everything, but if you really get down to brass tacks, I'm not sure that there's a single person on this earth that doesn't have some sort of faith, because when you sit down in a chair, you have the faith that chair is going to be there. You don't turn around and look at it while you're sitting down. When you get in your car, you have blind faith that you're going to get to your destination okay, and that you're going to get home okay. I think sometimes, honestly, the things that are the known are the things that make it sometimes harder to have faith. The unknown can be scary, but we deal with that all day long in so many things. I think sometimes, like for me, I trusted every day, and I still do when I go get in my car to get in the car to take Olivia to school. I trust that I'm going to get her to school okay, and that I'm going to get home without a second thought. And so I have the faith in that. But when it came to my cancer diagnosis, that known was ridiculously scary, and it still is, if I'm being honest, but I've done better at getting the perspective of, like, look, you do this every day without thinking. So why is this diagnosis any different? You trust God to take care of you and to handle things. So it's just perspective. And I think that's what we have to keep in mind, is that in the midst of this debate culture that we have, everybody wants to be offended by everything. Everybody wants to debate everything. When it comes down to it, God's there for us. Like I'll even use like the example we had a second ago, when Pierre said it's hard to sit through that. Look, it wasn't him. It wasn't him that was the issue. It was my heart. So, I didn't have the perspective at that time to understand what he was dealing with. So if he was coming across that way, it's because of what was going on in his life and in mine and how I took it. So, he's been him. He's been pretty consistent, if I'm really being honest. He's pretty consistent in who he is. And my perspective, my heart had to change. So I think sometimes it's not always what everything else needs to, everything else that needs to happen, everyone else that needs to change. Sometimes you have to take that reflection inwardly and say, maybe I'm looking at this wrong. So I think that could be an important lesson for faith as well.
Yeah, and I do too. And it's okay to doubt, right? We had a doubting Thomas in the Bible even. And so I think it's okay to doubt some things and to think some things through. Just because you're thinking about things, it doesn't mean that, all of a sudden you're going against God or anything like that. This title of this episode is To Believe or Not to Believe. And so it's just trying to put all the facts in a balance and in some kind of system where you can weigh one side and weigh the other side and see what you end up thinking. And to me, Pierre, whenever I have that faith, and like Michelle talked about starting up the car and getting to your destination, everything, it's the same for faith in God, faith in the Bible. Sometimes you just got to start the engine. Sometimes you just got to get in the car. Sometimes you just have to go, and you just have to do what you know is the right thing to do at the moment, and then let other things just fall into place. You know what I mean? You can't, if you knew everything from the start to finish, then you may never go anywhere, right? You don't have to know how your car works in order to get from place to place.
Correct. And I think that's kind of the whole journey that we all face at some point. Like for most people, there's a time where you're a non-believer. And I think that gets missed a lot when folks kind of point to, oh, you're a Christian and Christianity and your beliefs versus non-beliefs. There were times where we ourselves, were non-believers, but something happened in our lives that changed that. And it wasn't necessarily something that happened overnight. Like we started testing things out, testing our faith, putting our trust, in God and seeing what would happen. And ultimately something did happen that changed our hearts. And so that's just the thing, is it's not always knowing the answers or having it all figured out at the start. It's a journey to trust and have faith that, what you're praying to, who you're praying to is listening, is going to answer. And then that goes a long way with your beliefs, whether you do or you don't believe.
No, and I'll tell you, this is all going back to NF. Don't ask me why I mentioned it to start with. I'll tell you, it's a journey. He mentions journey many, many times in his songs. It's kind of funny. But to believe or not to believe, what do you guys think out there? Do you think it's a tough time believing in these principles, believing in the Bible, believing in God? How do you handle all that stuff? We would love to hear from you. You can reach out to us at Finding Faith Pod over on Twitter, or you can email the show at findingfaith.losingsleep@gmail.com. Like I said, you could Twitter all of us, so it's going to be located on the show description too. But you can also leave comments, leave hearts, leave stars, whatever listening platform you like to listen to the show on. We'd love to hear from you. I know Pierre is in charge of that. I don't know if you checked anything, Pierre, and you got any shout outs this time. You had shout outs last time, and I don't know if anybody maybe got scared off from our last episode whenever we talked about the end of the end of Mark not even being in the Bible. But I mean, possibly, I'm not saying it's not, but that's, the writers of the Bible were very confident in the rest of everything to be able to tell us where something is not.
This is true, very true. And again, it can scare you when you feel like things are missing. As for the comments, I have not checked, so I'll have to get back to you on that piece.
I meant to tell you to look at John chapter 9, by the way, before I went into my little rant there. Just the end of chapter 8, or the beginning of chapter 8, the end of chapter 7, just to see if there was any kind of asterisk there as well as there was in Mark chapter 13. And Michelle, as Pierre is kind of looking that up, I hope to be able to give me a little more giggle whenever I break that off to him. There are stories in the Bible, and I'm rereading the book of Mark. And I'm just about done. I think I'm done with it, actually. I'm headed into the next book. And Michelle, whenever I read this stuff, and I'm trying to take off blinders of being a Christian for 30 years, all right? I'm trying to take off those blinders and try to read it for the first time, okay? It's hard to do.
It is.
And I've read a lot of books. I've, studied a lot of things. I've sat at the feet of a lot of preachers over my years. And my head gets filled up. I'm a pretty good parrot, by the way. I can do good impressions and everything, so I'm a pretty good parrot. So I feel like sometimes I can spew off whatever I'm told pretty well. But I don't necessarily know that I've ever thought about these things really hard on my own, and I know I have times, but like trying to take off those lenses, those goggles a little bit, and just looking at it for the first time, there are some stories in the Bible that are just hard to believe, like hard to fathom. They are wild.
Yep.
Jesus walking on the water, that's wild. Wild. How does he walk? How he calms the storm with just a voice, just his word. How do you do that?
Mm-hmm. And like parting the Red Sea and like what else?
There's a bunch.
Jonah.
Yeah, Jonah and the fish or whale. I know that's the debate whether it's a fish or whale, but you start to think, so how does that happen? Like, how do you kind of get swallowed up by either or a fish or a whale? So I think you have to use your imagination at times.
Yeah.
I even think about like David and Goliath. Like you think about this big giant, and what a slingshot or a rock could do to a big giant. But when you kind of put things potentially into perspective and what they could have meant back then, I know like Goliath, for example, many believe that he just kind of had like almost like a giant type of disease. So I don't know if you're like an NBA follower, but most, if you look at the Bible, would think of Goliath like a Boban Marjanovic, who's just a really big guy, bigger hands, kind of just has that growth to him. Whereas David's probably going to be, a Spud Webb type, a Muggsy Bogues, a 5'3", 5'4", which when you look at that compared to a 7'3", a 7'4", it would be a giant. And those are just things I don't think people think about. They think about like this monster who's just, tearing cities apart, almost like a Godzilla, King Kong type of situation. Well, that's not necessarily what, that's referring to when it comes to the giant of Goliath. It could have just been a big, stronger man based off, his genetics and things along those lines.
Have you guys ever heard of the giant of Kandahar? I want to say Kandahar. I don't know how you pronounce it.
Kandahar.
Kandahar. There you go. Well, I'm glad you're not looking at it. But have you guys ever heard of that guy?
No.
Look, you can Google it. I'm not saying it ever happened or not. It's speculation of whether or not it happened. I don't know if it's in the Loch Ness Monster territory or if it's in Bigfoot territory. But there were some soldiers, and this isn't a joke. This is some soldiers. I know I can start off a joke like this. The United States military man encountered this giant red-headed beast. This giant. In Afghanistan, I want to say it was, in Kandahar, and they ended up shooting at him because he attacked some of the guys, and allegedly some of the people got killed in all this battle between them and this big old giant. And people speculate that whether or not the giant lived in a cave at the time, and then the military was walking through there, and the giant kind of got scared and came out and attacked him or whatever. I don't know. I don't know. I'm just saying that there's even people today who still go after these things. And some people would say that this actually happened. You can look it up and see it. So when I saw this, it actually doesn't make me question David and Goliath anymore. It kind of makes me go, well, if it could happen possibly then, it could probably possibly happen way back in David's time as well.
It's true, but you think of that because of what you've seen and what you've heard, though. So you've heard about that giant. So it's easier for you to kind of picture. It sounds like you even had like a little description of them there. Whereas if there's nothing to go off of, or if you don't have that mental image, I think it's tougher for people to kind of put, pieces together in their mind for those situations. But once you know that it's a possibility and that there's other reports of it, then it starts to become factual. You can even think about like the UFO stuff. So I don't know what's happening, in the U.S., take that with a grain of salt. But when it comes to unidentified flying objects, there were times where folks were like, oh, you're crazy, you're insane. But if you're a person that's seen something in the sky that's not something you've seen before, then you have a different perspective on it because it's actually something you've witnessed, which now changes your thoughts of, okay, maybe these people aren't crazy. Because what I just saw, doesn't look like an airplane. It doesn't look like a helicopter. That's something completely different. And it changes your thought process on what's real and what's not real.
It totally does. What about you, Michelle? You've talked a little bit about Noah and the flood, Jonah and the fish. How do you put that stuff in perspective? Because I like the way illustration that you use, Pierre. A lot of times I used David and Goliath. I always thought about Shaquille O'Neal because he was like one of the biggest guys I'd ever seen. Just I saw Dikembe Mutombo up front in personal at one time at an NBA game and got an autograph. I think my buddy got an autograph or something like that from him. And I would have described him as a giant. He was just huge. I mean, he was just a very tall man. He was a giant compared to me.
I think here's what I think. I think number one, unfortunately, we often lean on our own understanding. And so many of these Bible stories have been sensationalized so often and in the past that it just seems like that can't be true because it seems crazy. But here's the thing. It's in the Bible, number one. So for me, it's hard to discount that and to say, I can't believe that. It's hard. I'll agree. It's difficult. But maybe that shift in perspective. So you go from this 15-foot giant that was impossible for David to beat with a slingshot. Like maybe it's more along the lines of what Pierre said. And, it's kind of like the game of telephone. Once it's told so many times, it kind of gets lost in translation. So we don't know what that actually looked like back then. But I trust that what is in the Bible is true. So maybe it's not how I envision it in my own understanding, but I just have to feel like it's there for a reason. And, we don't have Jesus with us here right now. So if Jesus is there and he can part the Red Sea or, God can part the Red Sea, Jesus is there to do all these miracles. God can do anything. I've seen miracles in my own life. So it's hard for me to discount when things like that happen in the past just because I wasn't there. I don't know. So.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I'll tell you the truth. If Pinocchio can get swallowed by a whale and spit back out, so can Jonah. All right. I'm just going to tell you that right now. I'm not.
Well, even like with the flood, like I've seen, I think it was the Grand Canyon that someone kind of was walking around and just talking about what it would have taken for something like that to kind of take its form and like how much water would have had to push through, as quickly as it did to kind of leave the rock sedimentation and things along those lines.
Well, and it wasn't just there.
Yeah, it was throughout. And so you have folks, there's no way it could have been throughout the whole world. But when you start to see, different scientific even type of proof that would say the only thing that would make sense if mass water came through at a really quick amount of time in order for this to kind of take the form that it takes, then you start to get, again, a different perspective. Like, okay, well, maybe that's why this Grand Canyon's here. Again, we didn't live all the way in the past. We don't know how it all took place. You can have all the discoveries and scientific evidence, but at the end of the day, who was actually there to witness it all, when it comes to the facts, I guess you could say.
Yeah, definitely. And you go back to when you talked about the World Wide Flood. Have you ever been to the Creation Museum? I don't know if it's in Cincinnati. I'm pretty sure it's in Cincinnati. But there's a place called the Creation Museum. You guys ever heard that one?
Yes, I've heard of it, and I have not been, but would love to go.
There you go, Pierre.
Have you been to the Ark?
I think that's in the same area. I could be wrong.
I thought that was in Kentucky, maybe.
Yeah, you're probably right. I have not been to the Ark. Yes, I know about it. And when it comes to the worldwide flood, that's the reason why I think about it. There's a guy named Buddy Davis who does a lot of songs and everything. And we went there, we saw Buddy Davis and he sings some songs. And it's a pretty cool, fun little songs, fun little kid songs. And he talks about a worldwide flood. And that's what always reminds me of that when I hear of Noah and the Ark. And there was, how could there were flood like that? Well, when you read the creation story, you see that there's water above the firmament, is what the old Bible say, above the sky, above the heavens or whatever, but it's above the firmament and below the firmament. And we see that as being oceans and everything. And we see land dividing the waters from the waters and stuff. But the firmament, the sky was in between waters above it and waters below it. And then it says when God opened up the windows of heaven, that the waters came down, and I almost see all this water being stored up there above the firmament. And it kind of all relates back to dinosaurs, guys, because if you think about the kind of environment that the sun would be in, if there was water above it and there was water below it, it'd be like what do you call them things, like a terrarium or something like that, where it's just really hot and everything. And we know a majority of the dinosaurs were herbivores, right? I mean, that's what they were. They ate a lot of plants and everything. Then you had some carnivores, but even if you had carnivorous dinosaurs, they would have to eat another dinosaur. How many rabbits is a big dinosaur going to eat in order to, and how tired would a dinosaur be trying to chase around a bunch of little rabbits or something like that, or coyotes or anything? Yeah, they get really tired and winded. They can't, there's not enough food other than other dinosaurs to supplement their diet if you are a carnivorous dinosaur. So they needed the herbivorous dinosaurs. I'm totally making up words now, aren't I? I do that a lot.
You are needed those really funny pictures in my head, Wes.
Good. I'm glad I could paint funny pictures because I'm a terrible artist. But they needed the herbivores to be able to dine on them in order to survive. So if the waters above the heavens were open, if the windows above the heavens were opened up and the waters above there in the windows were let out, and it caused this great big worldwide flood, the environment would completely change. And maybe Noah did put a couple of dinosaurs on the ark. I don't know. I don't know about that. I wasn't there. I don't know, but I'm going to trust that he did, because we have the geological, is that right? We have the artifacts to be able to prove that there were dinosaurs at some point. Yeah. So even if he let the dinosaurs off the ark, it would be an entirely different world if there was no more water above the firmament. It wouldn't have that same tropical rainforesty kind of environment all over the planet. And then it would change the entire planet to where we would have the Ice Age. I've heard, and I've not seen them myself, but I've read, and I trust the people that I've read it from, that they found woolly mammoths with like fresh flowers in their stomach and in their mouth, maybe even. But I know it was in their stomach for sure. Fresh flowers. Woolly mammoths shouldn't have fresh flowers in their stomach unless there were fresh flowers wherever they were eating, and then bam, they were hit with a big freeze. So as I sit down and rationalize that stuff, I go, yeah, it's possible that it happened that way.
It is, and again, we're putting pieces together.
Oh yeah,
we've gotten things that we've read, and we then follow up on how could that be, and kind of make sense of how it could all be in the play. And that's kind of part of it. We don't know everything. We're not going to know everything, but you can read just like we read the Bible, and you can start to kind of piece together, some of the facts and the truths. And I know we often talk about, we mentioned, creation, like we talk about human creation is kind of how the human body works. How it gets rid of waste, and how the heart does its job, and your kidneys does its job, and all these things, and what it would take to really, even with birth, what it takes to have a successful childbirth, and all those things to form in the ways they form inside a woman's belly. Like, there has to be something to that. That's not just a coincidence on kind of how that all plays out. The sun, how far it is from the earth, the rain, and how it, just provides water and moisture. All these things like play a part, and it's like perfect. Like when you think about how we don't burn and stuff along those lines from the sun, like there's too much to be a coincidence that there's not something bigger, in my opinion, there.
Nah, I agree with you. Did you find John chapter 9, Pierre, or John chapter 8? Did you see that?
Yeah, so it's right at the end of 7, as you mentioned. The earlier manuscripts of many other ancient witnesses do not have John 7:53 through 8:11. A few manuscripts include these verses wholly or in part after John 7:37, John 21:25, Luke 21:38, and Luke 24:53. So John 7:53 through 8:11 is kind of similar to where the manuscripts are missing in some Bibles.
Yeah, and just the same as the end of Mark, and that was the adulterous woman story. And see, it's stuff like that I'm not going to say they included and should have omitted. I don't know. I'm not smart enough to know that stuff. And the people who put it in there felt confident enough to insert that into the Bible and tell you about the history of it.
Mhm.
And it's those same people, Michelle, who said, you know what? That Jonah in the whale, that's true. That Noah in the flood, that's David and Goliath, that's true. That Jesus being resurrected from the grave, that's true. I put it in there. So that's what helps me have confidence in the rest of that stuff, Michelle.
Oh, absolutely. And even when you go, for me, even I'll just kind of back up a little bit and say, for me, what gives me confidence is when I see God show up in my life. The things that are just too sensational in my own life to have worked out any other way than by God having a hand in it. So like Pierre said, even as far as like childbirth, like when I had my miscarriage, it was to be completely honest with you, it was one of the most perfect things I've ever seen in my life. It was like a little conch shell is the best I can put it. And my dad, God bless him, was so patient and so kind to, open that up for me, because at that point in my life, I thought that was going to be my only chance to be a mom and to see my child. So when we opened that up, the best I can tell you is that in that moment, God provided me. I'm a very emotional person, and God provided me with such amazing peace in that moment that I could just be in awe of how beautiful this tiny little human was. And quite honestly, just the most perfect tiny little fingers and toes, and just incredible. And that from then on, just my understanding of how many things have to go right for a fetus to be formed, how a baby, to be born, and for tissues to know how to form, and how nerves know how to work, and your bones know how to become bone, and how everything works together. It is shocking that we actually have as many successful births as we have. And that's all a testament to God. I mean, how your eyes know how to form, and all the, just everything is mind-boggling, and it's beautiful. And like Pierre said, it's hard to really wrap your brain around in your own understanding how all of these things work together, how your heart knows how to beat, and like all of those things, and the sun, the rain, the moon, like it's incredible. So when we get to Bible stories and what to believe and what not to believe, for me, I just go back to what I can understand and say, I can't even fathom how God couldn't be real when I've watched it in front of my own eyes, and I've seen, the beauty of a successful birth in our child, and, how God brought Pierre and I together. That was not of my own understanding. And so I just couldn't be more thankful. And like, it makes it hard for me when I do struggle with those stories in the Bible. It's hard for me when I really look at it on my own to not believe them.
Pierre, a 2022 Gallup poll showed that 81% of the U.S. adults believed in God, and that was down 6% from a 2017 poll. My question to you is, why the decline, Pierre?
Yeah, it's tough to wrap around, but you kind of watch how the world's kind of evolved into the instant type of gratification, and to everything being at your disposal. Like, you can Google anything you want right now and find answers to your questions. And with that, if you feel like you're not finding answers, I think people just kind of turn off. People are tired of people. And when things take place, they want instant gratification on their answers. And oftentimes, when you think about some of the way God works and some of the miracles, they're not in human time. They're in God's time. And when that happens, it's hard for people to kind of understand that, the pain that may be involved, the suffering that could take place. as well as not wanting to give the glory to God for some of their own accomplishments. And so after, year after year, I think you start to see a decline in faith with both, Christians and obviously non-believers staying non-believers.
Well, and I think in addition to that, we are such a divided, world. Like Pierre said earlier, Republicans and Democrats, just about the neighbors, like how everything's debatable and everything's offensive. And I think after a while that just becomes exhausting. And then on top of that, I think that people have an issue believing sometimes as much as tragedy can take you to God, it can take you away from God. So when these tragedies happen, like I saw on my Facebook yesterday that there was a crash and a grandmother was driving. Her vehicle flipped. Her daughter, who was just weeks away from giving birth, along with her 1-year-old and 3-year-old grandchildren, were in the back. And a passerby saw the vehicle, saw it had caught fire, was able to pull the driver, the grandmother, out, but couldn't reach the others, and the car was too engulfed in flames, and so they passed away. Well, I think when people see that type of stuff, it's really difficult for them to wrap their brain around, like, how could that happen? And so I think as much as tragedy can take you to God, it can also take some people away, if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. And Michelle, I really didn't know how to pivot from your story that you shared a little bit ago. And so I just went into that Gallup poll that Pierre had put on this show outline, and it's just a wonderful story. I'm sorry that you had to experience those things, but a wonderful story. And I know it's made you into the person that you are today. And I really appreciate you sharing that stuff. And you and Pierre both for sharing your lives as an open book here on this podcast, the Finding Faith and Losing Sleep podcast. I do want to encourage everybody to go back and listen to those past episodes, and you'll find out a little bit more about each and every one of us. And I think everything we're talking about now goes back to the things that Jesus commanded, of loving your neighbor as yourself. And I talked about being able to do the tangible things, right? And whenever you start doing the tangible things, you start being able to see the things that you cannot see. And it does start with loving God. And that's the first commandment, loving God. And that inspires you to start doing those tangible things for your neighbors. And then you start seeing things work around you, right? Mm-hmm. And we all here, or the three of us, Pierre, Michelle, myself, realize all the different obstacles that there is in believing in these things that we cannot see. But I do want to tell you that Jesus experienced that in his time. The apostles experienced this. Doubting Thomas was there, and everybody was telling each other, hey, Jesus was raised from the dead. Jesus raised from the dead. People are running back from the grave, and people are excited. And we saw it with our own eyes. And Thomas is sitting back there, right? And he's called Doubting Thomas for a reason. And Thomas is sitting back there, and he says, I ain't going to believe. I ain't going to believe until I put my fingers in his hands and my hand in his side, because that's why he died. He said, I ain't going to believe. And Jesus appeared to them again, right? Mm-hmm. And he looked at Thomas, and Thomas, and he says, Thomas, here it is, right here. Here's the nail holes in my hand. Here's the hole in my side. Go ahead. And Thomas just fell down. He said, my Lord and my God. And he said, Thomas, do you believe because you see? Blessed are those people who believe but do not see. Mm-hmm. And you know what? I am so selfish. Because when I read that, I'm like, Jesus is talking about me. That's what I think. I think that way whenever I read some of the scriptures, and it gives me the tingles whenever I think about something like that, because it does take faith, and we walk by faith. We walk by faith and not by sight, and that's what we try to do. And I'm telling you, sometimes it takes those first steps in a marathon in order to start running, whenever you're training, if that's what you're training for. And if we're training for life and we're training for the afterlife, we got to take those first steps in our faith journey, however that may be, and start walking. And then pretty soon, with all that training, we're able to run. That's my encouraging verses for the day.
Well, and with that, so what does it ultimately cost you is what I always come back to. Oh. So let's say we talk placebo effect. You know what the placebo effect is? Mm-hmm. So let's say none of this is real, but think about how all of our lives have changed believing it's real. That would be like a placebo effect. But think if it is real. So let's say, like we believe, God, Jesus is real, heaven is real. If you had a 50-50 chance of going to hell versus going to heaven, and it was free to kind of determine where you were going, what chance would you take? Being a non-believer, it's not gonna affect, though it's not gonna affect me if I don't believe. If I believe in God and I'm right, that's a great reward. If I believe in God and I'm wrong, I'm no worse off than anyone who's a non-believer. If they're wrong, however, that's a big difference. So that's kind of where I know people have beliefs, and I never make fun of anyone's beliefs because honestly, at the end of the day, nobody knows until that time comes for us. Otherwise, we're basically just listening to others and what we're reading. But until that day comes where you're called or not called, you have no idea. But if you have a chance to better your odds that heaven is real, that Jesus is real, why wouldn't you take that chance? Because even if you're wrong, you're no worse off than the rest of the world.
And that's true. I mean, Pierre and I've had this conversation a lot. And, when he was talking, actually, Wes, when you said a minute ago about, you had to take those first few steps to start the marathon. You don't just end up at the finish line, right?
Yeah, that was profound, wasn't it? That was really profound.
Wes, and I loved it. But it made me think of something like, as much of an open book as I am, there are some things I still haven't shared. And when I was really heavy in training, and we'll go into that later, what kind of training. So hold on to your hats, folks. But anyway, when I was in training, one of the things that my dad always told me was when you go, you need to be a bucket and sponge. You are the sponge. So where you're going and the information that you're learning is in the water in the bucket. And when you go, your job is to soak up as much information in your sponge as you possibly can. When you start questioning it or saying, well, that's not what I do, or that's not how I understood it, then you start wringing out your sponge. And so I kind of think, maybe our faith and our understanding of the Bible is the same way. I don't think it really hurts us to question it because I think that's just who we are as humans. But just understand that when you start saying, oh, well, that's not for me or whatever, you're wringing out your sponge. And so it takes, dipping it back in the water to soak it back up. And so it was just kind of that analogy that came to mind when you were talking about that. And I just kind of wanted to share it because I think sometimes that visual helps us too.
For sure. When you look at Bible, this is I think what I've always read, and I don't know where it came from, but it kind of hit home for me when I first saw it. When you look at the Bible and it's spelled out and someone put it as basic instructions before leaving Earth. That just for me set differently to think of it that way. These are basic instructions that you should follow before leaving Earth. And that's how I remember, Bible to this day.
Oh, like an acronym. I get it. Bible, basic instruction. Okay, Bible. I got you. Yeah, it takes me a minute sometimes. I'm really curious as to what the training is, and I need people to help me out with that training. Listen, I need people to help me out in a couple different ways. One, I need you guys to, as best as you can, use all capitals if you need to, yell at Pierre for not checking the things that he needs to check as far as being an executive producer on the show, whether that's the comments on whatever listening platform you like to listen to it on, leave it on Spotify, Apple iTunes, all those things. It's important to those people that we get comments and stuff like that, or that you leave a review and that you leave a little heart or something something, whatever it is that you can mash there to be able to say that you like the show. All right. So you can get onto them for that, or you can get onto them at findingfaith.losingsleep@gmail.com and tell us what you think. Why is it tough for people to believe? We want to read your comments here on the air as well on this podcast. And we want to give you a little shout out. If you want to be anonymous, that's fine as well. You can also find all of us over on Twitter at findingfaith.losingsleep. You can find me at Loafin'. You can find Pierre at PUE31. You can find Michelle at what is it with Go Pack Go 411. And the other thing I need help with, tell me what Michelle's talking about with her training, being a sponge, soaking up water. I'm picturing like swimming or something like that, but I don't think it's swimming, because I just don't think that it might be sponge water taking in everything. I don't know. Maybe she was going to be a nun one day. What is your guess? What do you think that it was going to be? I don't know, but I appreciate you guys listening to this podcast. And one more thing, got to ask you to do me one more favor. You pray for us and we'll pray for you.